The papers hit the kitchen table like a verdict. I didn't flinch. I'd been a structural engineer for 31 years. I knew what things looked like right before they collapsed. My son-in-law stood on the other side of the table with his arms crossed and that expression he always wore when he thought he was the smartest person in the room. He'd been wearing it a lot lately. Ever since my daughter's name got added to the deed of the company I built, he'd started looking at everything I owned like he was already measuring it for furniture. "Just read it," he said. "It's straightforward." I looked down at the document. It was a transfer of business interest. My 40% stake in Aldercroft Fabrication, the company I started in a rented warehouse in Akron, Ohio in 1989 with a used press brake and $12,000 I borrowed from my father-in-law, would be transferred to a joint LLC controlled by my daughter and her husband, effective immediately upon my signature. "Where did this come from?" I asked. "Our attorney drew it up," he said. "We've been thinking about the future. Your future. You're 64. You can't run that place forever." He said, "Your future, the way people say for your own good, like a door being closed from the outside." My daughter was sitting at the counter. She didn't look at me. She was turning her coffee mug in slow circles on the granite, staring at a spot somewhere between the mug and the window. I watched her for a moment. She was 41 years old and she looked very small sitting there. "Sweetheart," I said. She looked up, just for a second, then back to the mug. I put the papers down. "I'm not signing this today." My son-in-law exhaled through his nose. It was a sound I'd come to associate with the beginning of something unpleasant. "We're not asking you to hand anything over. We're asking for a partnership." "You're asking for a control," I said. "We're asking for security." He sat down across from me, leaning forward, suddenly all reasonableness and patience. "The business is worth something, real money. And if something happens to you, God forbid it goes through probate, it gets tied up for years. We're just trying to protect the family." I'd heard him use the word family before. He used it the way a magician uses a handkerchief, to distract you from what's happening with the other hand. "I'll have my own attorney look at it," I said. That was when things shifted. He stood up, and the reasonable man went somewhere else, and what was left was the version of him I'd only seen in flashes over the years, the version that showed up when he didn't get what he wanted quickly enough. "This is a courtesy," he said. "We're giving you the chance to do this properly. The alternative is that we pursue a competency evaluation." The kitchen went quiet. I looked at him. "Excuse me. You've been making decisions at the company that concern us. The Belhaven contract. You turned down $400,000. You gave Thompson's crew a raise when the margins were already thin. These aren't the decisions of someone operating at full capacity. I turned down the Belhaven contract because their safety record was a liability, and I wasn't going to put my name on a structure I didn't trust. I gave Thompson's crew a raise because they'd worked through a brutal Ohio winter without complaint, and they had families to feed. Those were the best two decisions I'd made all year, but I didn't say any of that. I said, I want you to leave my house." "This is our house too," he said. "Your daughter lives here. My daughter is welcome here anytime she wants. You can wait in the car." He laughed, a short, sharp sound. Then he straightened up, buttoned his jacket. He always wore jackets, even on weekends, like he was always about to be photographed, and he walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "Think about it, Everett. We're trying to keep this in the family." There it was again. Family. After he left, my daughter and I sat in the kitchen for a long time without talking. I made more coffee because I needed something to do with my hands. The furnace kicked on somewhere deep in the house, that familiar groan of old ductwork, and outside the window the backyard maple was bare and gray against a January sky. "He means well," she finally said. I didn't say anything. He's worried about money. The restaurant took a loss last year. He's been under a lot of pressure. She'd been married to him for 11 years. She knew how to translate him. The way you learn to understand a car that makes a particular sound. You stop hearing it as a warning and start hearing it as just the way the car runs. "Do you want this?" I asked her. "Is this what you want?" She didn't answer right away. That was its own kind of answer. "I want things to be stable," she said. I nodded. I finished my coffee. I drove to the shop. Aldercroft Fabrication sat on 6 acres in a light industrial park off State Route 224. We did custom steel fabrication, structural components, industrial equipment parts, specialized architectural metalwork. We had 22 employees. We had relationships with contractors and engineers going back 2 decades. We had a reputation that had survived recessions, supply chain disasters, a flood in 2011 that took out 2 bays and half our equipment, and a global pandemic that should have finished us but didn't because my guys showed up every single day. I walked through the shop floor that evening after everyone had gone home. The big overhead lights were off, and the emergency lights gave everything a dim amber cast. I walked past the press brakes and the welding stations and the plasma table and the QC bench where my foreman, a man named Tuck, had worked for 19 years. He'd started here when he was 26, right out of the Navy. He had 3 kids. He coached Little League in the summer. I sat in my office for a while. I thought about my wife. She'd been gone 6 years. Ovarian cancer, caught late, gone fast. That was the brutal arithmetic of it. She'd helped me build this place in the early years, doing the books on our kitchen table after our daughter went to bed, driving parts across 3 counties when we didn't have the cash for a delivery service. She never took a salary. She said the business was the salary. She would have known exactly what to do about all of this. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name was Sylvia, and she'd handled her family's legal matters for 20 years. And when I explained what had happened, she was quiet for a moment. And then she said, "Send me the documents." She called back that afternoon. "Everter," she said, "this is aggressively drafted." She walked me through it. The transfer wasn't just of my 40%. There was language buried in the LLC operating agreement that would give the new entity operational control over the entire company, including the 60% already held in my revocable trust. The competency evaluation threat wasn't idle. If they could establish a pattern of diminished business judgment, they could petition the court for a conservatorship. "They've had this drawn up for a while," Sylvia said. "This isn't something someone put together in a week." I sat with that for a moment. "What are my options?" I asked. She told me. I didn't change anything on the surface. I still went to the shop every day. I still had Sunday dinner at my daughter's house twice a month. My son-in-law was always pleasant at Sunday dinner, always asked about the business with what sounded like genuine interest, always refreshed my glass before I had to ask. He was good at pleasant. I'd underestimated how long he'd been practicing it. What I did was quiet. Sylvia helped me restructure the trust. We moved Aldercroft's core assets, the property, the equipment, the contracts, into a new entity, a family limited partnership with a professional trustee and a board of advisors that included Sylvia, my accountant, and the retired judge named Beaumont who'd known my father. My shares in the original company became limited partnership interests. Transferable, yes, but not without unanimous board consent. Then I did something my son-in-law wouldn't have predicted, because he didn't actually know me as well as he thought he did. I called a meeting. I sent formal invitations, mailed, certified, return receipt to my daughter, my son-in-law, and my 2 nephews, who were minority shareholders from an inheritance situation years ago. I also invited 3 people they wouldn't be expecting: Tuck, who represented the employee stakeholder group, a woman named Iris, who ran our largest client account, and a journalist from the Akron Beacon Journal, who had been working on a piece about family-owned manufacturing businesses in Northeast Ohio. The journalist was the key, not because I planned to say anything damaging, because my son-in-law cared enormously about how things looked. He had a LinkedIn profile with 4,000 followers. He went to charity events and made sure to be photographed. He'd once spent 45 minutes explaining to me why reputation was a form of currency. He believed this genuinely. It was one of the few things he'd ever said that I agreed with. The meeting was in the Aldercroft conference room on a Thursday afternoon in March. I'd had the room cleaned and set up properly. water pitchers, notepads, the good chairs from the front office. Tuck made coffee. The afternoon light came through the west windows and lay in long rectangles across the floor. They arrived at 2 o'clock. My son-in-law came in first, saw the room, saw Tuck, saw Iris, and then saw the woman with the notebook in the corner, and something moved across his face like a cloud shadow moving across a field. He looked at me. I nodded at the chair across the table. "Please sit down," I said. My daughter came in behind him. She stopped in the doorway. She looked at the room the same way he had, and then she looked at me. And for the first time in months, something in her expression wasn't turned down or turned away. She sat next to her husband. She didn't take his hand. I didn't begin with accusations. I didn't begin with anger. I'd thought a lot about how to begin, and what I kept coming back to was this. I'd spent 31 years solving structural problems. Every structural problem had the same basic shape. Something was bearing more load than it was designed for, and either you redistributed the load, or you reinforced the structure, or you acknowledged that the structure was wrong for what you were trying to build. I began with the history of the company. I talked for about 20 minutes. I talked about the borrowed $12,000 and the rented warehouse and the first contract, which was fabricating brackets for a loading dock in Canton. I talked about the flood of 2011 and what it had cost us and what it had taken to rebuild. I talked about my wife doing the books at the kitchen table. I talked about Tuck, who was sitting to my left and who had been here for every year of it. My son-in-law's expression during all of this was patient and slightly puzzled, the look of a man waiting for the point to arrive. Then I put the restructuring documents on the table. I explained what I had done. Clearly, without editorializing, the family limited partnership, the board, the unanimous consent requirement, the professional trustee. The transfer documents you asked me to sign, I said, would not have protected this company. They would have changed what this company is. I don't believe that's what this company is. I don't believe that's what this company's employees deserve, or its clients, or its history. My son-in-law started to speak. "I'm not finished," I said. He stopped. "I've also arranged for an independent financial audit of Aldecroft's books, which will be completed next month. The results will be shared with all shareholders. Going forward, any shareholder action will require board approval and will be documented." I looked at my daughter. "Everything I've built," I said, "I've built for you. That has always been true. But what I'm handing you has to be worth handing. If I give you something that's already been hollowed out, I've given you nothing." The room was quiet. The journalist from the Beacon Journal was writing something in her notebook. My son-in-law looked at her, then at me, then at the documents. The calculation behind his eyes was almost visible, like watching someone balance an equation on a whiteboard. He understood, I think, what the room meant. He understood the geometry of it, what could be said here and what couldn't, what a recorded account of a family dispute over a manufacturing business would look like in a newspaper, and what that would do to the reputation he'd spent years building. He picked up the water glass in front of him and took a long drink. He set it down carefully. "This is a lot to process," he said. "Take all the time you need," I said. He didn't say anything else. The journalist's piece ran 6 weeks later. It was a good piece. She wrote about small manufacturers in the Midwest holding on across generations, about the challenge of succession and what it took to keep something real alive in an economy that preferred things disposable. She quoted Tuck. She quoted Iris. She quoted me. Once, near the end of the piece, "The hardest thing about building something is that you have to keep deciding it's worth protecting." She did not quote my son-in-law. He had declined to be interviewed. He and my daughter moved out of the county that summer. He'd taken a position with a consulting firm in Charlotte. My daughter called me the week before they left. She came over alone without him, and we sat at the kitchen table the way we used to when she was in high school, and something was wrong and neither of us quite knew how to begin. "I'm sorry," she said after a while. I didn't say it was fine because it wasn't entirely fine, and she deserved honesty more than she deserved comfort right now. I love you, I said. That's not complicated. She cried a little. I got up and made tea because I needed something to do with my hands, same as always. Before she left, she hugged me in the doorway for a long time. The kind of hug that isn't about hello or goodbye, but about something that doesn't have a word. I stood in the doorway after her car pulled away and watched the taillights disappear at the end of the street. The audit came back clean. Better than clean. Our Q1 numbers that year were the best we'd posted since 2019. The Bellhaven job went to a competitor who had to stop work in August when OSHA cited 3 violations on the site. I didn't say anything about that to anyone. Some things don't need to be said. Tuck's oldest started as an apprentice welder that fall. First day, the kid came in nervous and too quiet and stood at the door of the shop like he was waiting for permission to enter. Tuck took him by the shoulder and walked him in, and I watched from my office window, and I thought about the first time I'd walked into this building. The rented warehouse with the bad wiring and the concrete floor that wasn't level. And how I'd stood there thinking I had no idea what I was doing, and that this was either the worst idea I'd ever had or the best. My daughter calls every Sunday now. We talk for an hour, sometimes more. She doesn't mention him much. I don't ask. Last month, she drove up from Charlotte alone for the weekend. We went to the Akron Art Museum on Saturday because she'd wanted to see an exhibit, and then we had dinner at a place on Main Street that does a dry-aged ribeye her mother would have loved. We sat there until they were setting up for the last seating, talking about nothing important. Her garden, my neighbor's new dog, a movie she'd seen, a book I'd started. Driving home, she said, "You seem happy, Dad." I thought about that. About the shop floor and the amber light. About Tuck's kid learning to strike an arc. About the company still standing, still bearing its own weight. I am, I said. She nodded. Looked out at the dark Ohio highway. I'm glad, she said, and she sounded like she meant it in more than one direction. I drove us home. The maple in the backyard had come back full and green, the way it did every year, no matter what kind of winter had come before, and I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment in the quiet before going inside. Some things you build with steel and welding wire and contracts and legal documents, and some things you build slowly with patience, across a kitchen table over cups of tea you didn't need but made anyway. Because building is the only thing you've ever known how to do, and you're not ready to stop.